FM News Talk 97.1 podcast.
Charges.
And they are protesting in the streets of Baltimore today, and I'm sure those protests will build throughout the course of the day as the community reacts to a situation that should never have happened in the first place from the standpoint of the officers in this case being charged. If there was discipline that needed to be brought at the police level, maybe, but this thing has been politically overcharged from the very beginning. And welcome back into the Marc Cox Show. I tell you what, if this is not reminiscent, and well, not just reminiscent of, but the genesis of this happened right here in St. Louis and Ferguson, with people taking to the streets with a narrative that all police are bad and that the death of this suspect in the back of a police van was caused by either the officer driving the van or the way the officer was, the way the Freddie Gray was treated when he was arrested. If there were allegations that they mishandled Freddie Gray in some way, then that should have been dealt with at that level. But this Marilyn Mosby, this prosecutor, just went off the rails in charging these 6 police officers, and the community will be happy with nothing but a conviction, because they get, if they don't see anything else as justice, which is just a shame. It really is. I know that one person who's been talking about this a lot is Jeff Roorda. Jeff is an author of Ferganistan. We've had you on the show talking about that. Or was it Fergistan? Was that it, Jeff?
Ferganistan.
It was Ferganistan. I thought so. How have you been?
I've been good. How about you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Have you seen the stories yet on the protests up in Baltimore? They're already starting. Yeah,
I am embarrassed to say I predicted this. I wrote a column yesterday for WorldNet Daily predicting that we'd see some protests and probably some violence and looting and rioting and arsons. This is, as you say, this is what happens when you engage in political prosecutions and appeasement prosecutions. You can never do enough.
Well, I mean, as somebody who's been involved with the police here in St. Louis for a long time, what is the answer to this? Because that seems to be what people are getting at. In fact, we are going to ask that question as part of our Twitter poll a little later today. We're going to have the details on that coming up. But specifically, people want blood when they are in a situation like this. What do you think the answer is?
The answer is serve justice, not serve the cries of a very loud, very small segment of our society that doesn't want peace. They want anarchy. They want revenge. They think that somehow they've been wronged because a police officer, in the case of Ferguson, defended his life and someone else lost their life because of it. This is reminiscent of the case we've got here in St. Louis right now, with Officer Jason Stockley being charged for first-degree murder in a 5-year-old case where the evidence is contrary to those charges. I mean, the Baltimore 6, Officer Stockley, this is becoming the new rage against weak-kneed prosecutors.
Right. True. I read a story today that the folks in Ferguson are going to have to go to the voters and ask for a tax increase to pay for all the changes that are being forced on them by the Department of Justice.
Right. The crushing weight of these so-called consent decrees, not that anybody's consenting to them, it's extortion, but it almost puts big cities out of business. It'll eventually bankrupt the city of Ferguson. I don't know how they survive the weight of this federal mandate, this federal excursion into local policing. But it's not the way things ought to happen.
Well, I know you were involved with the St. Louis Police Officers Association for a long time.
Yeah, I still am. I misunderstood your producer. I thought she was asking if I was at the Union Hall right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I still represent.
You're still representing them, and I've talked to Gabe Crocker about this as well with the St. Louis County Police Officers Association. But what is the feeling on the street among police officers right now? I mean, they've called it the Ferguson effect before,
right.
and I know you've written about it. Do they still have that moment's hesitation when they roll up on a scene because they don't know what consequences they may face if their split-second decision is the wrong one?
I still hear on an almost daily basis, I don't want to be the next Darren Wilson. And I'm sure police officers in Baltimore say, I don't want to be the next Edward Nero. This over-prosecution, this appeasement policy, this Chamberlain-like policy that prosecutors and politicians have adopted creates reluctance on the part of a police officer that doesn't want to be wrongfully prosecuted or wrongfully terminated or killed because of their irresponsible acts of this narrow group of people. But
the answer is so simple, Jeff, because Hillary Clinton says what we just need to do is retrain every police officer in the country. You're just not trained properly.
Well, we need to retrain the people on the other side of these confrontations. The police officers, if you look at all these confrontations, the police officers act properly in the face of somebody resisting arrest or being combative or trying to murder them. And we focused on the police side of these confrontations, and everybody's rushing towards these faux police reforms when what we really have is generally kids on the other side of the confrontation making really bad decisions because we're not trying to change the way we train them as a society.
Right. Yeah, and responsibility is the biggest missing word that we have today, and I'm not quite sure how that gets turned around, because you've got now generations of people who are raising their kids the way they were brought up, and there's a built-in fear of the police. They don't cooperate with anything, and they're never going to take responsibility for their actions. It's just not going to happen.
Freddie Gray was responsible for his own death. Had he complied, he would have been buckled in the back of that van. He wasn't, because the officers didn't think they could safely get back there with a combative suspect in that small area that you have in the back of the conveyance vans and buckle him in. That's on him. That's not on those police officers.
Yeah, it's a good point. We're talking to Jeff Roorda, and Jeff had a book published late last year called Ferganistan, The War on Police. Love the book, by the way, and I'm glad that people are going to get your look at this. I know Tom Jackson, the chief in Ferguson, is in the process of writing a book as well. I just wish it was required reading in schools across the country, because I don't know how we get this level of common sense into the minds of our young people to get them to realize what's going on here is not what they're being told.
Yeah, and the exciting news for me, Mark, is we're re-releasing the book. You know, I self-published originally, and now a national publishing company has picked up the book, and we're re-releasing it in the fall.
Oh, good.
Some additional content and sort of some commentary on more than just what happened here in Ferguson and St. Louis, what was happening in other places as well.
Like Baltimore.
Exactly.
No doubt. Yeah, that's good. Jeff Roorda, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for letting us have you on the show today.
Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely. You take care of yourself. Always good to talk to Jeff. Check out the book. Like you said, it's being reissued this fall, Ferganistan, The War on Police. And that's what it's come down to. And now they're not even sure in some cases that the prosecutors have their back. Remember the talk about a police enforcement slowdown in Baltimore after this happened? So you get sent out of your precinct in the morning. You go make what is a fairly standard arrest. The guy dies of a pre-existing neck injury on his way back to the police department. The city pays out a $6 million+ settlement to the family, admitting to something it's not clear was the city's fault before it ever went to trial. And then the prosecutor comes out and shows her bias by saying that she's trying to get justice for the people and charges the six police officers involved in this arrest. They wouldn't even let them admit evidence of the knife the guy was carrying. They did everything they could to prevent these officers from a fair trial. And yet the first one ended in a hung jury, and the second one has now ended with a complete acquittal. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the next four in. They'll keep trying different angles until they convict one of these police officers, which is a shame. Jim, thanks for listening. Thanks for calling in.
Mark, I love your show. I just wanted to say that, I have a great respect, and I could never do what the law enforcement officials do. However, with that being said, that 0.1% that are the truly bad apples, it just doesn't seem like the other law enforcement officials are running them out, or they're not being prosecuted, or they're just, quietly swept under the rug.
I see. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, there's a certain percentage of people in every profession who are bad. You can't. And what the movement these days is, Jim, I would argue, is to paint with a broad brush and make it seem like every officer that pulls you over is going to mistreat you. And that's the shame of what's going on. They've just stolen the narrative here.
Well, I can agree with you on that regards, but it just, as I mentioned, I have, they took an oath to the Constitution, the state Constitution, and when that, like I said, that 1.1 bad percent, it just ruins it for all of them, and you never really hear about officers stepping up and turning in a coworker. If we heard those kind of stories, I think a lot of people would start changing their minds.
Well, Jim, I appreciate you calling in with your opinion there. I'm sure there are a lot of people that share your point of view on that. And I think a lot of it is because it depends on your own personal interaction with the police, right? So if you've been pulled over and thought that whatever you were charged with was a trumped-up charge, you're going to start to believe that this person is one of the bad police, so to speak, or the dishonest police officers. And every profession has a couple. But you can't – the point is here, there are officers like that. Darren Wilson was not one of them. Edward Nero was not one of them. But because of the efforts of certain groups, good police officers are labeled as one of the bad eggs because they're charged by an overzealous prosecutor. Our Twitter poll is now active, and it's fitting that we're talking about this subject right now. You can go to @TonyColumbo971 or @MarcCox971, and you can vote in this poll. We're going to have the results tomorrow, and here's the poll. Nationally, there's been many protests against the police. Obviously, Ferguson, Baltimore, Chicago, New York. Here's our poll today. Do you think a certain percentage of police officers are dishonest or dirty? Obviously, our last caller does think that there's a number of those people and that it's not talked about. I tend to disagree. Although there are bad doctors and bad lawyers and bad talk show hosts, there are bad people in every profession. Nobody's perfect, but I don't think it's the high volume number that some people believe. 314-969-9797. Coming up, we're going to talk to Peggy Hubbard. I'm sure she's got an opinion on this. You're listening to The Marc Cox Show.